Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is Tuesday, February 25th. And 2 or 3 podcasts ago, we spent some time talking about Venus and Pisces magic. And that was a lot of fun. We did the great Venus and Pisces talisman giveaway, and that was a lot of fun too. And in fact, I think we had the highest number of downloads in the history of the podcast that month. So I decided from now on, we're not going to talk about Venus. We're just going to talk about Saturn for the rest of the year. Yeah, no, no, I'm kidding. Now it's a great time to get back to Venus, because this is an incredible time for Venus, really. There's actually several reasons. And in fact, the report that I made for my members this month has not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different kinds of Venus magic lined up. So we're doing Venus magic 2, 3, 4, and 5.0 this time around. So it should be a lot of fun. So why are we getting back on the Venus horse? I mean, other than the fact that she's, great and beautiful and all that. Well, Venus is in Aries, so you're like, what's going on with that? Well, Venus actually rules the 3rd decan of Aries, the 3rd 10-degree segment of Aries. And this is something that I've talked about before. So yeah, these decans are something I've been having fun with for a little while. I talked about them couple years ago at the Great Lakes Astrology Conference, and I'm going to be talking about them again for Astrology Hub in April and May. And I've also written about them for astrology.com, of course. So let's look at some visuals so we can see what the heck I'm talking about here. And by the way, if you're listening in on the audio version, you can always switch over to the YouTube version of the podcast to see all the visuals. So I made this table of times for the entire year of 2020 when the planets are going to be in their decans. And let's just look briefly at another thing that will show us. So the decans are ruled by what's called the descending or Chaldean order. So they start with Mars here in the 1st decan of Aries, and then in order of descending speed and also from the farthest away that they are in the Ptolemaic spheres, you have Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, then you have Sun and Venus. Then you go to Mercury and the Moon, and then you go back to Saturn and start over again. So we're going Mars, Sun, Venus for the first 3 decans of Aries. So Venus rules this 3rd 10 degrees, from 20 degrees Aries to all the way up to 30. And so this gives her special powers. Decan rulership, if you look, for instance, in Demetra George's wonderful new book about ancient astrology, she talks about how the decans were always used magically. They were used by the Egyptians as sort of a map for the dead to navigate the afterlife. And they were used to create amulets to ward off specific diseases and stuff like that. So they've always been looked at very magically. And then in the later 19th and early 20th century, the Golden Dawn associated these planets and their decans with the minor arcana of the tarot, because there's 36 minor arcana when you consider the aces to be their own special case. You have 36 cards left. And so what that does is that means you have, 12 signs with 3 decans each. There's 36. It's a great fit. And so from starting yesterday on February 24th all the way through March 4th, Venus is going to be in this 3rd decan of Aries, which she rules. And the Golden Dawn called this the Lord, I would say, Lady of perfected work. And there's this sense of completion. There's this sense of bringing something to its full completion and its highest perfected state that goes along with this. Notice that Mars is also going to be in one of his home decans from March 1st through the middle of March. We're gonna do a separate podcast on that because we've already got Venus 2, 3, 4, and 5.0 to deal with here today. All right, so yeah, why? So first of all, Venus is just what's happening, right? She just went into her home decan, and second of all, by the way, if you want a copy of this, I'm sharing it with both my members and with the Astrology Hub Inner Circle people. So you might want to think about checking out one of those two things to join one of those member programs. And here's a diagram that shows how the cardinal signs rule the 2, 3, and 4 of that suit. So Aries being cardinal fire, 2, 3, and 4 of wands, so on and so forth, right? All right, so the other reason why, and this is for later, I'm going to just stop for a second. So the other reason why that we're getting back on the Venus horse, so to speak, so soon is that, you know, for modern astrologers, they got really kind of obsessed with the outer planets. In fact, they kind of went off the deep end with like all this stuff about, and the truth is, they haven't even been around all that long, and I'm not sure we even really understand them. For instance, you know, Pluto. Well, Pluto was added into the planetary pantheon, and then we figure out, you know what? Pluto really ain't much like the rest of the planets, and not only that, there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there about the same size and acts a lot more like him than any of the planets do. They're called Plutinos. And so it's a bit complicated. And what I realized at one point in time during my career is like, you know, for me, the juice is in the inner life. You know, I'm dedicated to the inner life. And you know, these socio-political planets and these big, you know, personal planets, not so interesting to me because to me the real juice is you've got the sun and the earth, right? And this is what is known as the astronomical unit in scientific terms, but what I call it is the sun earth enclave. It's the heart space of our system. It's where we live, right? And guess what? There's only 3 planets that can penetrate that heart space. There's only 3 planets that can be closer to Earth than the sun. And those 3 planets are, of course, Venus, who can be the closest to Earth, Mercury, and Mars. Those are the only 3 planets. And so those 3 planets take a special place in my cosmology. And when I'm doing my chart prep, you know, there's a whole section where I look at those planets and where they're at in their cycles as being important to understanding a person and their spiritual needs and so forth. So this is another reason why, I mean, generally speaking, you'll see me talking about those 3 planets way more than you will anything else. And as we mentioned last time, this particular synodic cycle of Venus is very special, y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and show you what's up with that. So, so what happens is Venus, in terms of visibility, she emerges in the eastern sky during retrograde motion, and then she gets very quickly high and bright in the east as morning star. Then she does this long, slow descent where over 7 months, and there's 7 conjunctions with a waning moon, she gets lower and dimmer. Then she disappears altogether for 60 days. And then she reappears in the evening sky with the waxing moon and makes 7 conjunctions with the waxing moon. So this alone is like really fascinating, the symmetry and the beauty of it. And that's where we're at now. We're in these 7 conjunctions with the waxing moon. But this cycle, the place where Venus first became visible, first popped out as a morning star, that happened when she was in Libra. And that hasn't happened. Venus becoming visible in the sign of Libra hasn't happened for like 200 years. Because as Ariel Gutman pointed out in her wonderful tome on Venus, you know, it takes about 200 years for the 5-pointed star to go through all of the signs. Okay? So this is a very unusual, this hasn't happened in our lifetimes, hasn't happened in a few lifetimes. This is a very unusual cycle. And then what's happening, these 7 conjunctions with Venus are lined up in a way where not only did the cycle start in one of Venus's dignities, but then we had Venus conjunct the moon in Pisces. Now we're going to have Venus conjunct the moon in the 3rd Decan of Aries, which is also one of her dignities. And then we're going to have Venus conjunct the moon in Taurus. So 3 months in a row, Venus is going to be making these, is going to be getting higher and brighter as evening star. And by the way, think about this for a second. And this is actually, the way I read it, is in the Picatrix, and where they talk about a planet being just getting less bright, suggests that it's less powerful. And so if we think about visibility as agency, and this is not a completely unfamiliar term in terms of classical astrology. For instance, the idea of combustion and being under the beams. If a planet isn't visible at all, it's thought to be weakened. Well, if it's not visible at all and it's weakened, then if it's super visible and super bright, isn't that stronger? It would make sense, tend to make sense, right? But yet you don't see a lot of that in the classical astrology. I'm not sure why, but it sure does make sense to me. And so if we think about this idea of Venus getting higher and brighter and becoming like super, she's out for hours after dark, and she's as bright you cannot miss. Even in the brightest city on Earth, you cannot miss how bright she is. This visibility could be construed as agency, so that the Venus function, so that our heart function, our ability to be magnetically drawn to things that are juicy for us and feel good, and our ability to create harmony and cohesion with other people, so forth. This has tremendous agency at the moment because of Venus's high and bright appearance in the sky, you see? And then you throw in the fact that 3 conjunctions in a row are happening in her dignities. I mean, and the cycle began in one of her dignities. That's like super, super powerful to me. So yeah, how could I not talk about Venus and what she's doing right now? So we're going to get back to that little diagram here in a second. But I wanted to share with y'all what this conjunction that's coming up in a couple days is going to look like in the sky. So here's the moon and Venus. Now, notice that you see the word Pisces here. So they're in the constellation of Pisces in terms of the zodiacal constellation. But see, there's the symbol for Aries. So in terms of tropical coordinates, they're in late Aries. But in terms of constellations, of course, they're in Pisces. But look over here. Here's the constellation of Andromeda. A little bit further, there's Cassiopeia. Here's Pegasus. There's Cepheus the king. And there's Cetus the sea monster. Whoa, and a little further up, which they're going to get to next month, is the constellation of Perseus, who is kind of this outside figure that comes into this whole complex situation that we see. And so this is very interesting because, in fact, the Andromeda Nebula is right about here. It's also known as, I think it's M31. Messier 31. Messier was a great comet hunter, and he went to the trouble of creating a catalog of all the stuff that is not comets, so that you could quickly rule out when somebody says, "I thought I saw a comet last night, and it was over here," and no, 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 that's M31, right? So, being now, the Andromeda galaxy is actually visible to the naked eye. You can see it, and because it's one of the closest galaxies to us. And so this is very interesting to me that Venus is in the stars uh, of the Andromeda constellation, because one of the things that really stood out to me when I was reading the Picatrix, there's this section in book 4, chapter 4, where they talk about, it says, one of the most perfect books of this science that we have found is a volume that was revealed by Hermes the sage at the founding of Babylon. And this was a book of aphorisms called The Secret of Secrets. And there's 45 aphorisms. And number 13 says, if you do planetary working with the aid of some fixed star of the same nature, it will be more complete and more perfect, because it will have the vigor of the planet and the endurance of the fixed star. Now let's unpack that for a second, because this is a profound statement in my opinion. Okay, so what they're saying is that if the star and the planet are of the same nature, and right away we have Venus, who's goddess of love and beauty, and we have Andromeda, who was this gorgeous princess, right? So, okay, boom, I mean, pretty clear right there that there's some affinity here. Then those are going to work together more easily. It's sort of implicit, it's implied that those are going to work together more easily, simply because they're of the same nature. And then it says that it improves the work and makes it more perfect because you have the vigor of the planet. Planets were called, the word planet means wandering star. So there's this volatility that the planet's always moving. They're always searching. They're these wandering bodies that are always moving, whereas the fixed stars are constant. They show up at the same time of year in the same place and so on, right? This goes back to a subject that I've been harping on for some time. It's in my archives. When people sign up for the gold level membership, they get access to like everything that I've done for the last 10 years, which is a lot of stuff. And one of the things that I've been harping on for a while is this idea in alchemy of the fixed and the volatile. I went into this at length at the last UAC, the last United Astrology Conference, where I was talking about alchemy and magic in relation to astrology. And what you've got to understand is this idea of in alchemy, which is a sister art to astrology, and therefore allows us to understand astrology from a more holistic perspective. This idea of the fixed and the volatile, they would say you have to make the volatile fixed and the fixed volatile. In other words, you have these sort of, like for instance, earth and water, the symbol is down and in, right? All the interesting stuff about earth and water is underneath the surface. Whereas fire and air are upward pointing triangles. They're volatile elements. They're more obvious. When you combine those two things, then you have wholeness, you see? So when you combine the energy of a planet, which is moving, it's volatile, and the nature of a fixed star, which is more enduring, you get this combination of the fixed, this alchemy that makes it even more powerful than simply 1 + 1 = 2. It's actually this sum is, the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, you see. So there's this very interesting idea that when you combine a star of the planet with a star of the same nature, that it has this volatile energy that gets things moving and gets things but also the endurance of a fixed star. Because, for instance, um, when you make talismans, you can make them in different mediums. So if you make, for instance, a paper talisman, because paper is less durable, the energy of the talisman, it's like sort of like, it's like different classes of batteries, or that makes for a battery that doesn't last as long. But when you're using fixed star energy, because of the nature, fixed stars take 72 years to move 1 degree, yo. I mean, that's some endurance. So, I'll be happy if I make it to 72 years and see, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, you get more of that endurance from the fixed stars. So this conjunction of the moon and Venus with Andromeda is really fascinating to me, and I think that um, it would make an interesting talisman, because Albertus Magnus said that the nature of Andromeda in terms of constellational talismans, and this is something that I'm going to be talking about more um, in July 13th. I'm going to be doing a workshop on fixed star and constellational magic for the Great Lakes Astrology Conference. So if you want to find out all about how to do these talismans, that's the next place where I'm going to be doing it live. Um, this idea of Andromeda being about conciliation, because we're going to talk about this story in depth, because it's a fascinating story, kind of disturbing actually, but fascinating at the same time. This idea of that it's about conciliation and enduring love. And you can see from the myth why he chose those terms to describe what the magic of Andromeda is about. But think about it, conciliation, enduring love. Well, that's kind of the same thing Venus wants. So they're natural teammates, you see? So this conjunction, I think, is really potent opportunity. And, there's different ways that you can work with that. I think that if you just went out in the sky, um, and communed with that and beheld that awesome sight, that would probably be enough. But there's obviously ways that we can do it. For instance, we can get an image of Andromeda and we can meditate on that if it's cloudy outside or whatever. I looked at the Wikipedia page. This is the image of the Andromeda constellation from Sidney Hall's Urania's Mirror. So she's called the chained woman, right? Because as we'll see in the mythology, they chained her to a rock so she could be sacrificed to this monster. And here's another image from Gustave Doré of this monster coming to, eat the beautiful princess. So you could use an image of Andromeda to meditate on if you're not able to get out in the sky. And then you could even use some of the symbols and sigils of Venus to make like a paper talisman, for instance. I think there's a square to Saturn here, and the moon has reception with Saturn. The moon is in the late degrees of signs, usually belong to Mars and Saturn in terms of bounds or terms. So the moon is in the terms of Saturn here. So the moon doesn't have as much of a problem, because it's nighttime. The moon rules the Earth triplicity where Saturn's located. So there's some mutual reception there. But Venus doesn't. Venus is not in the terms. Venus has some dignity, so she has some strength to deal with Saturn. But I would say that this talisman would probably be best for a petition. And it would probably be best for a petition where, hey, Venus is square Saturn. We know there's pain. We know there's difficulty. So everybody's got some of that in life. Deal with where you've already made mistakes, or where somebody else has, in your opinion, made a mistake with you, where there's pain and suffering, and ask for that to be eased, for conciliation and lasting love, especially in long-term relationships, right? So this would be a great thing to like kind of smooth over the rough edges of an existing relationship, whether that be business, friends. Yeah, I remember Demetra George is great. I remember one time she said to me, she said, Venus doesn't necessarily care who's doing what with whom as long as people are getting it on. So as long as people are loving one another, it don't matter if it's friends, business people, you know, LTRs, what have you. This is good juju, as they say. All right, so let's pause for a second here. So yeah, we can talk about how to use this alignment magically. But you know, as well versed and as much as I love, you know, classical astrology and the Hermetic arts and magic and alchemy, I've also got, you know, modern astrology chops as a counselor and you know, somebody who's got a degree in psychology and so forth. And this is really, really potent. I think you could do just as good, just as well, by really like diving into your inner experience, and rather than trying to smooth over the outer experience with magic, which would be, or maybe in addition to, you can really dive into this myth, because it is really, you know, something else entirely. And I don't know, maybe it would be easier to have the image, I guess it depends on who you are, to have the image of Andromeda up there while we're doing this. But when you dive into this myth, it's really very interesting, and like I said, kind of disturbing on several different levels. So basically, Andromeda is the daughter of Cassiopeia and Cepheus, the king and queen of Ethiopia. And you know, I remember hearing one time, you know, Cepheus was like this dude who was like, you know, into self-reliance. And he was kind of, you know, like, hey, you know, maybe we don't need the gods quite as much. You know, maybe if we stop, like, you know, just appealing to the gods for everything all the time and trying to get them to help us out, maybe if we just like took more response, kind of Saturnian, right? Took more responsibility for our own lives, and maybe we'd be better off. And I don't know if this is related, but in my reading of the myth, it is, where, and then Cassiopeia says something to the effect, yeah, and you know, my daughter and I are more beautiful than the Nereids anyways, or something like that. Which is, of course, you know, automatically kind of making the female the sort of, you know, uh, bad person in the deal, which, you know, we already know that's already like vilifying the feminine is an old cultural problem. But that's the way the story goes, that Cassiopeia bragged that that either she and Andromeda, or at least Andromeda, was more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs. And because Poseidon is the god of the sea, this angered him. He's like, oh, no, we call that hubris, and generally that gets punished. So he says, I tell you what, I got a friend who I want to come see you. And he sends Cetus, the sea monster, also known as the Kraken in the movies, right? He sends the Kraken over to visit the Ethiopians, and the Kraken is like devastating the Ethiopians and all this stuff. And so so Cepheus goes to an oracle and says, what the heck can I do about this? You know, we've got a situation here. My kingdom's being destroyed. What can I do? And they said, well, you got to sacrifice your daughter if you want to get rid of that beast. And so says, well, the Ethiopian people are pressuring him. Hey, 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 the good of the many is more important than the good of the few, and your daughter is, in this case, is the few. Chain that woman up, right? Now, right away, we get into some interesting territory here because she didn't do anything. Andromeda was innocent. She did nothing wrong. Her parents, or at least one of them, in my opinion, both of them, were acting very questionably, but she didn't do nothing. But she's the one who's going to get tied to the rock. It's like, wow, man, seriously? That right there, this whole sins of the father and mother, visiting on the daughters and sons, that whole trip. And how much of that do we see in the world, for goodness sakes? Like, the Carl Jung said the unlived life of the parents is the psychological problem par excellence, and the poor decisions made in one generation, trickling down through many other generations, um, and intractable problems like poverty, and that's just like, poverty is like a disease. It just doesn't go away. Um, so we're starting to get into this territory where that's why I said it's a little bit disturbing. And what happens is, the hero Perseus, and again, I know this is very stereotypical. Of course, the male comes and rescues the helpless female, right? But again, that's, we're talking about the Greeks. It was a long time ago. And so Perseus has been, with the aid of Athena and Hermes, has slain the Gorgon Medusa. And the Gorgon Medusa, we're going to get to that a little later on, was once a beautiful maiden herself, like Andromeda. And before a whole trip got laid on her, right? And so Perseus is coming by, and he sees this woman chained to a rock, and he says, hey, wow, she's beautiful. He's kind of smitten. And so he says, oh, well, I just happen to have this head of this beast that turns stuff to stone. So, hey, sea monster, take some of this. And turns the monster to stone, and actually turns Andromeda's uncle to stone too. I think she was promised to her uncle, which back in the day, again, that sort of thing was kind of common too, I guess. And anyway, the guy that was supposed to marry her got some of that Medusa stuff too. And now these two kind of live happily ever after. And what's really interesting about this, remember how we said fixed star energy being more enduring? The story goes on, after Andromeda and Perseus get married, Perseus founds Mycenae, the Mycenaean culture, which was and supposedly he's thought to be the ancestor of the Persians, Persians. Now this is some fascinating stuff, because it's the Persians who really put, this book, the Picatrix, the Goal of the Wise, as it's known, is from the Persian era. You see, the Greeks were definitely infected with, I say infected because I'm not a fan, with Stoicism. I mean, I understand there's some benefits to Stoicism, but this idea of, well, just accept your fate, I'm not a huge fan. I understand sometimes that is the best thing you can do, actually. I do understand that. But the Persians were like, no, we're gonna work some magic. We're gonna like figure out at least where the wiggle room is at the very minimum, right? So this idea that this magical, star of Algol, which is the, Medusa's head, has this enduring legacy, not only through the myth, but through culture and time. You can begin to see here the power of these fixed stars, So this is really fascinating. And then, of course, Andromeda gets placed in the sky along with all these other players in this, Perseus rides the winged horse Pegasus, which comes out of the neck of Medusa after he cuts her head off, rides that to the scene, kills the sea monster, and then of course you've got Cepheus and Cassiopeia over here too. So this is some really, and I think that like just reading that story and meditating on it and writing down your own reactions, journaling, right? This is what I love. One of my favorite colleagues, Shireen Shostak, she's wonderful at this stuff. She sets up these exercises where people can journal on these different ideas and really like explore it for yourself and feel like, how do I feel about that? When has that happened to me? When have I paid the price for somebody else's sins? And so forth. This is really rich territory. So that's another way that we could go about this. And it bears repeating also here that it's very interesting. Well, not interesting. It's very like sort of, this is maybe even the more troublesome part of the story, is that Andromeda was never seen for herself. She was, and what did we talk about last time when we talked about that Arthurian myth? What do women really want? And it turns out, according to women, according to the source, they want A, to be seen for their true inner nature, and B, to have complete autonomy in their lives. And she was never really seen for her inner nature. She was this pawn that was used in this big international chess game of like, saving the country and getting mom and dad off the hook. And it's really kind of sad. And what's even sadder is that there's a lot of people out there running around who have their own versions of this stuff, and for instance, there's a psychological complex that's known as the Electra complex, right? So what do you think it would do to you psychologically if your father was willing to like, set you up in chains for some monster to eat, right? I mean, did he really see her inner essence? I'm always aghast at like, you would think a father would go, no, not my daughter. I'll volunteer myself to be eaten by the monster, right? But no, we didn't get that. So you have this idea. It's sort of the corollary to the Oedipus complex for men. You have the Electra complex for women. And let me just be clear right away. I'm not a Freudian. Maybe I'd be a neo-Freudian. So I'm not saying that literally children want to have sex with their parents. That's not it. What they want is they want to be seen for their inner essence, right? That's what women want. Guess what? That's what everybody wants, really. It's just a lot harder for women because of all the cultural bullshit that they have to endure. So that's really what those two complexes are about. And so when that's not happening, when the father is not seeing the daughter for her inner essence, then you get this Electra complex where she then says, well, if he can't see me, maybe somebody else can, right? And so you get these stand-ins. For Sylvia Plath wrote a poem about this that's often interpreted as a classic example. I think the poem was called Daddy, where she literally had this relationship with a husband that was, troubled, to say the least, that was reflective of her relationship with her father and so on. And so, so it's really important to understand that, like, one of the biggest things that we can do when we as astrologers show up with another human being, to see them for their inner essence and to have an authentic human relation with them, to say, hey, I see you like blank, and just to affirm them. And that's like huge, because there's so often that we don't get that from people who we really need it from, you see. And so rather than seeing them as like this person who we're, contracted to do some work with and blah, blah, blah. Like just really seeing them as a person and really trying to listen and see them. I cannot overstate the importance of that. If you do nothing else and you only do that, you've won. You've both won. It's that important. Okay. And so it's so easy to get like with all these techniques and, oh, I got to tell you about this and I got to tell you about your fate and I got to tell you, man, slow down, listen and see the other person. And then, okay, from there we can go to, okay, maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other, maybe some magic, and whatnot. But with this kind of thing going on, it's really important to remember the power and the importance of seeing someone for who they really are and not as some pawn in some kind of game that this whole capitalist society, tries to make, this endless cycle of like buying and selling stuff, including people and their time and so on. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's probably enough of that. Sorry if that's a little dark, but hey, it is what it is, and got to keep it real. Okay, so next up we have, after Venus is done in Aries, we have Venus in Taurus. And this is probably the best time for Venus really during the whole year, because she's making a trine to Capricorn. So you don't have any of that edgy energy from any of the malefic planets sort of messing up the fun for Venus. So there's several opportunities for to take advantage of Venus and Taurus in terms of talisman work for magic, and really just for in general. Venus is very powerful in both in terms of domicile dignity, that is, she gives the power of resources in Taurus, and she also has triplicity dignity in earth signs during the day, which is about community support, basically. So getting resources and getting community support are going to be potentially a lot easier with Venus and Taurus. And so when we work with Venus magically, we can enhance our personal attractiveness and or charisma. So it'd be a good time to get a makeover, good time to get some new clothes, good time to just be more positive and have and focus on your own magnetism, your own ability to be likable. It also promotes creativity and artistic expression. And of course, love, affection, esteem actually is like, so you have love and affection, and then you have the esteem of your colleagues, which is actually higher on Maslow's hierarchy. But of course, you have to be able to get love and affection from, one-on-one relationships before you can build that esteem at the next level. And then just general social harmony, So Venus and Taurus, her highest and brightest conjunction with the moon is going to be happening. And this is like, wow, this is a huge opportunity and there's several opportunities, but I narrowed it down to one. And I created an election for my people, and I gave them instructions on how to create a Venus talisman. I'm probably going to be making some of my own too, hopefully have some for sale. But if you want to find out more about that, consider becoming a member. Also, subscribe to my newsletter, because the little bird told me that this 15-page report that I made for my members, that has not one, not two, not three, but 4 different kinds of Venus magic, might eventually become available as a sort of trial subscription if you want to see what you're missing every month. Yeah, so you might want to be signed up for my newsletter when that comes out. And now we're going to talk about Algol, because So we had Venus Decan opportunity, Venus constellational opportunity with Andromeda, Venus in a sign of Taurus, and now we're going to talk about fixed star magic with Algol. So the next conjunction of Venus and the Moon in late Taurus happens to be right here in the constellation. See, down here is Andromeda, here's Cassiopeia, and then here's Perseus. So this whole story gets completed as Perseus comes in with the head of Algol and shakes up this weird situation that's going on with this Ethiopian royal family. As you can see here, Venus and the Moon are lining up right there with the head of Medusa. And I got to tell you, I was a little bit intimidated by all the stuff that you hear about this. And I was like, yeah, I might work with some of these other stars. I'm probably not going to touch that one. And then I was out during the meteor showers, the Perseid meteor showers, which emanate from this constellation. And I was just sort of meditating on the fact that, you know, this isn't just the Perseid meteor showers. This is coming from this place where this, you know, severed head is. And like, there was all this energy that shot out of, like, Pegasus came out of her neck when, and like, here you have these shooting meteors. I was like, there's got to be a connection with that. And in fact, I made a connection with this star, or with the goddess of the star, the spirit of the star, whatever you want to call it. And she has encouraged me to do her work. In fact, right now I'm wearing an Algol talisman that I made last year. It's a silver, and it's got 2 little diamonds for the eyes. And so I've been working with the star, and I think it's a wonderful. What happens is that Algol is a tremendously protective star, because on, you know, just like her, you know, think about it. That's what Perseus was doing when he was protecting Andromeda, this innocent person who was about to get sacrificed. I mean, how much more protective could you get than saving someone's life, you know? And so, and the wonderful thing about, there's several different stars that you can use for protective talismans, but the wonderful thing about Algol is she doesn't just, it's not just a shield, although she was definitely on the shield of Athena. But it's not, in other words, it doesn't just, you know, deflect energy. It, boom, it sends it back, it returns to sender, so that people get, you know, a taste of their own medicine, as it were, if they're trying to mess with you. It also is said to make people bold and magnanimous. Perseus, the heroic energy of Perseus, for instance, and preserves health. So this is a very, very multifaceted star that I think is sort of one of the best ones that you can work with. And I talked about in my article for the magical transits of 2020 for astrology.com. There's a few opportunities to work with Algol this year. This is definitely one of the best ones. The chart that I came up for this one is really awesome. And it's got like 5 planets in dignity. I'm really excited about making some. And I'm going to make paper talismans. I'm going to have some simple metal, like copper discs with like an Algol face on, and I'm going to engrave the Algol on the back. And then I've got some really nice copper coins that have the Medusa head on the front, and I'm going to engrave, and they're made into big pendants, and I'm going to engrave those. So I'm going to have Algol talismans with 3 different price points. So hopefully, like, whatever your price point is, and there'll be anybody who needs some protection, or who wants to sort of join the cult of Medusa, as it were. I'm a member, I'm a fan. I mean, it's really interesting, because I was asking her, I was like, so, you know, like, when I'm working with you, is it, you know, you know, you seem pretty popular, and I'm thinking, like, you know, that, you know, there's some commercial opportunities here. Is that all right with you? And she's like, oh, honey, she's like, if you increase my cult of worship, you can make all the money you want. You go right ahead. So I was like, wow, pretty cool. I'm definitely happy to do that. So yeah, I'm gonna be working with this one, and as I said, I'm gonna be giving a lecture later this year at Great Lakes Astrology Conference, actually a workshop on how to make these constellation and fixed star talismans. Um, and I think, for me, like in sports and whatever, as a football fan, um, I've always been, I played defense, and so I've always been like a defense first kind of person. Like, before you can go out and do any of these positive things, if you want to attract money or fame or whatever it is that people want, um, you better have a good defense in place first, because to keep any negative energies at bay before you go out and try to mount your offense. Um, so that's why I always try to keep a good stock of these protective talismans, so that I have something to offer someone who's going through a really hard time. It was just the other day, I had somebody who was going through a hard time, and I made these sun with Antares talismans a while back, and I had made some oil and some tincture at the same time, and I sent some of that to somebody who was going through a hard time, and it felt like even just knowing that help was on the way really settled them down, and so I was like, man, I'm so glad that I try to always keep some of these things in stock, because it seems to be like, the main thing that people need oftentimes, especially because this is not just protection, but it's health too. You know, um, so all right, I guess that's about it for this time. Hope you enjoyed this Venus Magic 2345.0. And I sure did. It was a lot of fun to create this 15-page report for my members, and I just feel very proud that I'm giving them a lot of value for their $10 a month. And it's a lot of fun, and it's an honor to serve that way. And I hope that anyone else who's interested feels free to jump in, and we have a good time with it. So feel free to check that out. As I said, please remember to join the newsletter list for announcements, and like us on Facebook and all that good stuff. And thanks again to everybody who participated in the leaving reviews and whatnot. It's really great to kind of get some feedback and know that that even after a decade of doing this, that it's still meaningful in people's lives, and so that keeps me going. And so thank you. It's been a pleasure, and bright blessings of the brightest planet in the sky as she's getting higher and brighter all month. Hail, Goddess Venus. Until next time.